So
Okay.
thanks a lot, Loredana. Is that how you say your name?
Yes, Loredana Cârstea it's how I would pronounce my name in my native language.
So Karstea is how you say your last name?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And what pronouns do you use?
I don't have any special pronouns.
Okay. So like, yeah, okay. So I can use like she, her for when I describe the podcast.
Sure.
Okay. So this morning I actually, I noticed that, I found that quote on your blog. What was it exactly? I was born in the midst of the gunshots of the Romanian Revolution. And I looked up when that was, and that was like December 1989.
Yes.
So
Correct.
I think you and I were born the same year because I was born in May 1989.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So by the way, I really did not expect that I would get such a quick response from you, and that like in just a couple of days we would be having like this Zoom meeting. I had no idea that this would work out. But
I usually try to respond fast if
yeah. So I was looking up a little bit about the Romanian Revolution, and it eventually led to the overthrowing of the, what's his name, Susescu, or
Nicolae Ceausescu is how you would say his name in Romanian. Usually in English they pronounce it Ceausescu or something of the sort.
So the thing is, I had heard about that overthrowing multiple times because it was like a very dramatic event that happened.
Yes.
And the first time I heard about it was, Banksy, who's this artist who makes graffiti. He has this book called Wall and Peace. And in that book, there was a little description of how the whole thing happened. There was like a mass gathering, and some person started chanting like down with whatever. And so it was like that like kind of dramatic story.
It's about his last the last time he spoke to the audience. So it was on a balcony, and the people were gathered around like they would gather outside, and that's when for the first time in his life the people were chanting against him, and he didn't really, it seemed like he couldn't realize, he couldn't comprehend that this was happening because his perception was that the people were with him. It's an interesting video to
I
see
saw the video also. At some point, like the camera starts shaking and it just like cuts off. It was pretty crazy.
But I can tell you that even now, after 30 plus years, we don't know the entire truth of what happened at that point in time. Because you usually hear these stories of okay, there was a revolution, the people, they won, hooray. But it's not that simple. To give you just a small detail, the people were very unhappy because what Ceausescu did was to pay our entire external debt that Romania had towards other countries after the Second World War and afterwards, when we had some reconstruction. Anyway, the 1989 was the last year we had zero debt at that point in time, so it was very convenient to get rid of him exactly at that moment. And of course, the population was very unhappy because to pay the external debt, they suffered a lot of not having enough food, not having anything from the outside. Even hot water was 2 hours per week, if I can remember correctly. So it was good for us as a people because then we had access to so many things from the West and from America. We are very influenced by American culture. And then we had the internet, which was an even greater thing. But things are not that simple. And I think because we had the security, how can I don't know exactly the word in English. The Communist Party had this security forces, which were the secret police, I can say, which was a thing. We now have a lot of documentation on this. And I know people who were even followed in by neighbors by it. It was a whole thing with people spying on each other. But these people helped actually have the revolution, and they were the ones who eventually killed the dictator. But this is also a karmic debt of my people. And one effect of this was that the corruption that was in the Communist Party continued, but it was under another face. And we still have a lot of internal wars with corruption even now. We have not gotten rid of those older demons that we had back then.
So do you have your like the audio recording, by the way?
Yes.
With microphone?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
And so how long do you have for this conversation?
I can have 1-2 hours.
Okay. Cool. All right. So I think we should get started with the questions. Okay, so I already got my answer to the first 2 questions. Yeah, so we were kind of talking about this, so this is like a segue. So could you give me a little bit of an idea, about your background? Like, what are the settings? Where were you born? What were the circumstances in which you were growing up? What was life like for you as you were growing up in Romania? Could you like paint a little bit of a picture of your life background?
So, as I said, I was born on the 15th of December, and on the 16th of December, that's when the revolution started. The first seeds were planted in Timișoara, which is in the west of the country, and then by the 25th, it was in the whole country, and on the 25th, it's when Nicolae Ceausescu was killed. And I was in the neonatal ICU, the intensive care unit, because I was a premature baby. That's how I was born, and I had to stay 2 weeks there. And from what I know, my mother just saw me when she delivered me, and then when she took me home. And for the 2 weeks there, I had no contact with her. I do think maybe that has a bit of has had maybe some effect on myself, but I haven't determined exactly what that was. But it's a recurring pattern in my childhood that I would stay a lot of time alone. So this is one thing that I think gave me a lot of time in my childhood to reflect on life, on death, on who I am, on who I want to be in the world. So it's quite an important part of.
If I could interject here, and at any point, if I'm saying anything that it's like too personal or whatever, you can just like cut me off. But I was reading this blog post that you wrote about what was it? Disabusing yourself with the dictionary. And my idea of the picture that I got was, I mean, I might be wrong. This might not be what you were trying to communicate, but it was an idea that, you can't even trust your parents. And the picture that I got from that blog post was basically an idea where you like pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, as they say in English. Like the only thing that you can ultimately depend on is some kind of like a neutral and objective avenue to truth. You can't even trust like someone like your parents. So I was sitting and thinking about a little bit about like, what is the possible like kind of perspective that you have on the world, and how is it shaped by, your relationship to your parents? So, yeah.
Yes, because parents are people.
Yeah.
And in the same way that we have flaws, they have flaws. The interesting thing in your childhood is that for for some years, you look at your parents like they are gods for you, because they give you what to eat, they take care of you, you abide by their rules, and you sometimes, a lot of times, you don't even question if those rules are correct, or actually you question, but maybe you don't have an environment where you can actually express those concerns. It can happen, and it happens, and even for people who are self-aware, they sometimes they're not self-aware. It's hard to be self-aware all the time. So I think the moment you find out that your parents can be wrong is very important, because it's the first window into this larger world, because it is large, even if you don't see it from, from the confines of your house. So yes, that story was about the little lies that parents can tell children in order to make them do the right thing, something that they think it's the right thing. But I think these small lies, like saying that Bugs Bunny tells you to eat carrots, they eventually compound into something else. We need, as children, we need truth. We need actual truth and data, so our brains can actually process and find answers. We don't need pre-digested answers. We need the data so we can parse it and figure out what we need to do in life, basically, and how we need to interact with others. And if we're fed data that is not correct, it affects us. We don't even know exactly how.
Yeah. So going back again, sorry, I kind of interrupted you. You were telling me about your life background.
Yeah, so I can say that initially, because it was after the revolution, life was my parents didn't have a lot of money when I was a child growing up, so I didn't have toys, and also I didn't want to go to kindergarten, for example, and I told them that I can just stay alone in the house at 4 years of age. And somehow my mother actually listened to me, and she said, okay, let's try this out for one day, let's see. At 4 years of age, I knew how to lock the door. I even knew how to put my food on the stove and light the stove, make sure it was closed, and so on. And my mother would call me each 5 minutes, what are you doing? Have you eaten? Have you closed the stove? Go look again and see, and things like this. But this meant that I was considered a responsible person at 4 years old, which was actually made a very big difference in my life. And but also it comes with the drawbacks of getting through your childhood fears, which are very normal at that age. I also had anxiety because I was alone, and when I heard sounds coming from other people and things like this. So it's there are good and bad sides to this experience, but I think it shaped me because I just had to stay with myself and entertain my mind, create stories, think about uh, various things in life, about my relationship with my parents, about even going to what I would do if I would run away from home, for example. How would my parents react to that? How would other people? What would happen if I would die? How do I feel about this? How would my parents feel about this? And so on. And it offered me a perspective that was more detached, because at that point in time you don't have a lot of responsibilities, so you're not so ingrained in the world. You don't have so many emotional connections that usually are tie you down a little bit to this life. So remembering the perspective that I had back then was very helpful when you find yourself in the midst of life being, pulled in one way or another. And in short, to get past this period of time. I had the chance to work with a very good teacher in the first 4 grades, which I think she was very correct and meritocratic in the classroom, and she encouraged. She was mostly on a math teacher, but doing poetry also. So I really liked her, and I really liked school due to her. So I was fairly good at math, not that great. I wasn't in the top list at Olympiads and stuff like this, but I liked math. Eventually, I went to medical school, even though I liked math for various reasons. And then I ended up, after graduation, I became a programmer full time, and I dedicated a lot of time to build projects and become as good as I can at this. And I already told you, I work 12 to 16 hours a day usually. I've worked like this for a long time.
Yeah. As you were talking about this like kind of early life experience, the idea that I'm getting is kind of like an orientation towards like radical like self-reliance and like not depending on like trusting, basing things on trust. And I'm wondering how much of that has to do with the values of this like decentralized trustless technology. Like, do you see that there's any link between your life values and the kind of technology that you're into?
Yeah, of course. When I first saw Ethereum, I didn't completely understand what it did, but eventually I got to understand the high level of it, and I thought that the culture fits very well with what I was trying to do up until that point. At that point, we were me and a friend were looking into creating ontologies, especially medical ontologies, because ontologies they're the basis of what you can build as software infrastructure. And
could you describe for me like what is ontologies here?
Ontologies are just it's like a vocabulary with a relationship between words.
Okay.
And so we were using these, for example, for medical imaging projects where you had images and they were labeled and interconnected. We wanted to interconnect information. So this is what we were doing at that point in time. And the vision that we had was about an interconnected internet. So you'd go to one word and find out a whole array of other information that was linked to that word and so on. And then we eventually realized that this cannot be done without decentralization, because it's not good to have only institutions or companies that have, for example, a restrictive license on words, on terminology. So then that was a big problem in the medical field.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
So it fit the vision about how the next society will be, with more responsibility on people, and also with the responsibility also comes a bigger voice, and vice versa.
So how early was it in the history of Ethereum that you kind of started getting into Ethereum, and how was it that you started getting into it? Did you start developing stuff, or what was that like?
So I found out about Ethereum in 2016, and it took probably half a year later. In 2017, I actually applied for a blockchain job, and I got it. And it was with a company that was doing infrastructure for Ethereum. So it's one of the scaling solutions. It was the first real scaling solution that was put forth in the ecosystem. And yeah, I worked for them almost 2 years, even doing an ICO, an initial coin offering. I was the lead for the smart contracts, and also uh, planning various parts of the projects. Like you have these monitoring systems for the smart contracts that would do some automated actions on behalf of the users, because with payment channels, the server, the node that you keep, you need to keep it all the time online. So you can have these services that do some of this work of keeping the services online for you. So this was it was an interesting project, and it got me uh, access to a lot of knowledge about Ethereum, and even conferences and connection with other software developers from the Ethereum Foundation and so on.
Yeah,
but I eventually resigned from the company in 2019.
Yeah, and is that the time that you started like building things like mostly on your own?
Yes, well, I was doing that even while working. So one of the projects that started this pipeline, I was already working on it since even before I resigned.
Yeah.
And the efforts and the obstacles are different when you work in a company that's paying you, and then you have all this freedom to actually pursue what you think is moral and correct. Then you have other obstacles and uh, other joys.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about a little bit more. That's also one of the reasons that I was interested in interviewing you, because it seemed like, well, I haven't really gotten into this like Ethereum space. I have not gotten to any meetings or conferences or anything. I just have like this obsession with the technology since I started kind of understanding. At some point I started, like, a couple of my friends were really into like blockchain and whatever. And for a long time, I was like, what the hell is this thing? I don't even understand. What is this? And they could not ever really explain the whole thing. And at some point I started learning by myself, what is a hashing function? And why is it hard to invert the hashing function? Oh, okay. All right. So, this is the basic proof of work thing. Oh, okay. I kind of start to understand how the thing happens and why it's hard to have decentralized like ledger system as opposed to something like BitTorrent. If you just have to share multiple copies of a thing, that's not very hard. But if you have to like if you have like a file that can be spread to multiple people, that's not such a big problem. But if you have like money, then it goes from one account to another. It can't, at the same time, you cannot send that money to like 3 different accounts. You can't like double spend. So I was like, okay, so I'm starting to understand why this technology needs to be like a little bit more sophisticated. So I kind of learned about it. I kind of gave a talk about it at the university to my friends just because I wanted to practice understanding it. And since then, I have been kind of like hooked on the Ethereum Reddit. It's not the best quality stuff out there, like the Reddit discussion, but I kind of invested in Ethereum and I kept tracking what are the things that people are building. And it's just been like a kind of obsession for me since then. And I'm nowhere, I don't have the expertise to like understand the details of this stuff. And at some point I just realized that I'm just going to draw a boundary that my knowledge is going to be this at this popular level. I kind of know what's going on, but I don't know any of the details, and that's fine, Also, I wanted to understand enough to make sure that what I was invested in was like not something completely BS. And over time, like, okay, no, this is not BS. I kind of understand. So it's observing this community online and just reading about the articles and things like that, it kind of seems to me like this is a time when like a lot of like companies are emerging within Ethereum, and basically they are working for all of this, what I might call startups that have carved out some niche, and they're like, we're going to work on this thing. It's like a scaling solution or some kind of an interoperability solution or some application on top of Ethereum. Okay, we're going to use like Ethereum to sign in, blah, 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 etc. And they're all like companies, and I don't know how many people they have, but it's not like a one person thing. That's not what I see most of the time. So that's why I felt like your experience is kind of unique. I don't know how many other people are out there that I just don't know about that are just like developing stuff on their own. I know a couple of other people who are probably doing like, you know, some solo projects, but they seem to be like, even if they're doing solo projects, they're like much more tightly connected with like other groups and collaborators and things like that. But in your case, it seemed like you were the one that was just doing the most like solo stuff, but I'm not entirely sure if that's correct. Could you tell me a little bit more about, you know, how much of that is true and what has been your experience? Is it like kind of a unique experience for someone in this Ethereum space to be developing stuff on their own if you compare yourself to other people that you see?
So I think the unicity is not necessarily the alone part, but the volunteering part. Um, I implement everything alone, but I have a friend who does software design. He likes to meditate on what's possible to build with these technologies and what society would need. And I bring most of these ideas to life. And we do this without wanting to get paid for it, especially that a lot of this work goes into the Laurel Project. So the work is at times collaborative, especially when we have these discussions where we agree what we want to implement, but mostly it is me staying 12, 16 hours at the computer trying to implement these things. And sometimes I do videos.
Yeah. So do you have, sorry, go ahead.
But so this was for at least 1.5 to 2 years. But for the past 3 months, I have been actually helping Evmos, which is a blockchain that combines the Ethereum virtual machine with the Cosmos ecosystem. And I have been doing this also as a volunteer, as part of through the Laurel Project. And because at some point, the Laurel Project has a good chance to also use this technology for the blockchain that we are doing for volunteers. So I'm doing two things here. If it's a technology that we want to use, I want to contribute to it. And also contribute to it as a volunteer, because this is what I also ask of people who would want to join the Laurel Project. And what's interesting about this technology is that it could become like the original dream of Ethereum 2.0, because you have Evmos like Ethereum is now, but when you integrate it in the Cosmos ecosystem, you can have sharding and you can have multiple execution environments like Ethereum wanted with EWASM. So here you can have also the EVM, and you can have Cosmos WASM and other things. So this is what I have been working in the past 3 months, and I'm implementing a way that developers are rewarded for their work on the smart contracts through the protocol level. So when you deploy smart contracts, if people are using them, part of the gas cost goes to you as a developer. Yeah. Which I think this is a very interesting thing, because usually in the blockchain space, at least you need to to go to the team that maybe has a fund, and you need to tell them, look, I'm building this, can you please approve me in your program? But if you have this at the protocol level, it's more meritocratic, and you're not depending on, I don't know, maybe some networking effect, some social issues or networking issues or things like this. So the Laurel Project is now in a time where it collaborates with other projects that have also a good heart at the core, and it's hard to find this in the crypto space.
So I want to get to your perception of the culture of the crypto space, but let's talk a little bit about your motivation behind the Laurel Project a little bit. I think, I've been reading some articles since I started reading about Ethereum, because Ethereum is not just about technology. It connects to a lot of like political questions, economic questions, questions of resource and policy and things like that. And it connects to a lot of kind of like open problems in the realm of, think about politics or economy. And one of those problems is sustainable open source development, which is also, in different words, it has been called the problem of like public goods. How do you fund, or what do you call it? What was that called? Or whatever, I kind of forgot, but like, how do you fund something where it's going to become open source, so it's not going to like just like directly benefit you? And I've heard of this problem in the context of science and research as well. You spend a lot of time doing research, and what happens some of the time is that then all of this work that you put in, and maybe there was like public funding that went into your research, but then what you do is like the business model is you publish in some journal, and some of these journals are not open source. So basically then you have to pay a subscription to that journal to gain access to the fruits of my like intellectual property. And the body that makes like profit from that is this journal, who did not really put as much effort into, okay, they put some effort into like the peer review and everything, but it's kind of unfair that they then get to have like this walled garden thing that shields out like pretty much all of humanity who's not affiliated with the university from the results of this like science that you do. And so a lot of scientists are like, no, we want to publish like open source. But then what is the business model for that? And I heard of something called Research Coin. I don't know if you ever heard of something like that, where I think the idea is that there's going to be some kind of a system that keeps track of what paper has cited what paper, etc. And then anytime that you use the results of some paper or something, there is some kind of a compensation, and the program automatically determines not only to pay the authors of that paper, but to pay a fraction of that to the authors of the cited papers, and a smaller fraction of that to the authors of those cited papers, etc., so that it kind of trickles backwards, maybe a couple of steps. And so it seemed like a completely new and radical idea of how to fund open source research without being dependent on like centralized entities like journals and things like that. So I think this is like a very interesting question, because once there is some kind of a solution to this, it opens up so many windows for like, open source. It's just going to incentivize open source development, open source science and whatnot. Sorry, I just got like so carried away.
No, this is very good, and it's similar to one of the projects that we started at some point, which is a moral license for open source.
Yeah. I was looking at that yesterday.
And it was it's the same principle as what you said about scientific research. It's if you are using the work of someone else and you get donations, for example, so it would come with a software. You get donations, then you trickle down those donations also to the work of other developers that you've used, and so on. But with a caveat. So I would like for example, software to be able to have a moral license where you can say as a developer, if you use this software for unethical, immoral things, then I will get the license from you and you cannot use it anymore. So the idea combined two things: a moral license that you can enforce on your effort, and rewarding other people in a transparent way. Because this is one of the things that blockchains have and have very good: transparency. You can have transparency on the blockchain, so there are a lot of use cases for this, especially in the public domain, not in the private domain, but in the public, where you need to prove things to other people. And this is one thing for research and for open source. They are very good use cases.
Yeah. So coming kind of like personally to your experience. So right now, as you said, you're volunteering a lot of time and effort in developing what are basically like open source technology, right? So, but you're not getting paid for that.
Not all of it is open source, because I'm doing a volunteering effort at this point. So some, if the Laurel Project would have a lot of visibility, this would be one thing that I would like to really have it in the open source.
I see.
Yeah. But up until until that point, we are doing a lot of new things, and it's not, we don't want to put it out there right now, but eventually it should. It's open source for volunteers in the Laurel Project. So that's, we have a bit of a walled garden at this point.
Yeah. So how is compensation working for you? Because if you're not being paid for all of these hours and time of effort that you're putting in, then like how are you managing to like sustain? Do you have like some other source of something from some other work that you're doing?
One thing is that I consume very little.
Yeah.
That's one thing that actually allows me to volunteer at this point in my life. And two, I could have enough money to live some years without needing to get paid.
Yeah.
And it's a choice of austerity when I am working on the Laurel Project.
Yeah. So now let's talk a little bit about contrasting your experience to what you see as, what the rest of the crypto space is like. So a lot of them have these like companies and things like that who have like raised a lot of money through ICOs and things like that. And one thing that I noticed is that, there will be people there whose job is to like write Medium articles or things like that. Basically, anytime they make some kind of a technological development, to spread it through like all kinds of social media, and everyone's like, oh my God, they're like doing this and whatever. And it like comes as this big flashy explosion. And like compared to that, my idea is like, I cannot get into the details of what you're doing, but it kind of feels like your work has like a lot of substance for, the amount of marketing. It's like, oh, you just like post a video. Oh, you just did this. Oh, wow. Okay. But so it seems like the culture is a little bit different. So how do you feel is like the rest of the Ethereum culture? Is it like kind of like gimmicky? It's like, is it like too much hype? Or I'm not close enough to that, so I don't know exactly what it is like.
So I do, you could say, zero marketing.
Yeah.
So the difference is big, and indeed, a lot of the things that are presented in the crypto space are very flashy, and they seem to be, they get people enthusiastic on things that are, if you look from a technical perspective, they're not really that, they're not either, they're not innovative or they're not that much effort, but they know very well how to promote it and get people very enthusiastic about it. It can be easier to get people enthusiastic about it when you tell them, well, you can make a lot of money with us.
Yeah.
It's less easy to make people enthusiastic about volunteer work, and the words duty and effort and let's make society tools for an unbiased society. But it doesn't matter. I take my work more like a duty of what I want to push out into the world. And if this has success, I'll be very happy. If it's not, you can just look at it at a work of art.
Yeah.
And it's from my perspective, I'll be happy that at least I did my duty, and I will not ask myself what if.
That's kind of interesting. So when we were growing up in India, one of the things that we heard, one of the sayings, it's kind of from Hinduism, but it's just like a philosophy. And in Bangla, which is my first language, it goes like Karma koro, pholer chinta koriyo na. Karma is like karma. And what it means is like, do the work, don't think about the results. Like just do your work without becoming attached to what the consequences of that work will be. And that's like, it's like pretty hard to do that if you're like putting a lot of effort into something, to be detached from the results, to possibly be always open to the idea that it's not going to go anywhere and nobody is going to pick it up and it's not, people are not going to use it, but to still be able to continue doing that. It seems like there's like a little bit of that reflection or that perspective when you're working on something. So like, yeah, do you find that kind of hard to like?
Yes, of course. It's now it's easier just because I've worked on this idea and I've had time in the past years, but 1 year ago it was hard. It was harder to you need to be able to accept the idea of failure, but don't accept the idea of failure by not doing your part. You can fail if because of, I don't know, the context that you're in is not the right context. Maybe you're too early, maybe etc. But at least you shouldn't fail because you did not do the effort. What I am sure with the work I do is that by staying on the cutting edge, then there is a high chance of success. If you are on the cutting edge and you are looking a couple of years in advance and imagining the next society. And this is very important when you don't have a lot of an entire team of people to work on this. But if you are sure you can look ahead, then you might have time to put everything together until the right time comes. But again, it is very important to be detached of these results, because you can you can become demoralized. And I need to wake up each day feeling fresh and joyous in a way about what I'm building. Otherwise you cannot do it long term.
I get. So that I think is one of the advantages of kind of working by yourself, is that even though it's like hard and daunting, as far as the idea is concerned, you can like be as ambitious as you want. And you'll be like, okay, this is what I envision, and I'm just gonna work on this, even if it seems like it's, nobody else is along for the ride. Whereas compared to that, if you're working in a company or a group of people, you have a lot more like manpower to like put into the development, and it's probably going to progress faster. But since it's like a group of people,
it depends. You can have teams of more people that don't progress faster, because humans are very good at making up pretexts for not doing things. You would be amazed. But I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. But what I was trying to get at is like, I think your ambitions get a little bit locked because, now it's like a group of 5 people who all have to agree to work on that. And they, like 3 of them, I think, no, that's too wild. There's no immediate like use case for this. And we need to build something that, whatever. So maybe the ambition gets a little bit more conservative when it becomes diluted across like a group. So like, I see like that's kind of like one of the trade-offs. But the other side, which I've kind of been feeling a little bit when I go through the posts on Ethereum, the thing that I feel a little bit bummed about is that some of those posts where, okay, they have made some technological progress, but now they have a person to write like a flashy Medium article with like a picture or whatever, some memes and things like that. And they have raised a lot of money and they have some kind of coin associated with it. It gets a lot more visibility and hype compared to, for example, when I see some of your posts on the Ethereum subreddit, it seems like a lot of work, but the amount of response or attention is like much lower. And I understand because you don't do a lot of marketing, you don't have like a team. So does that ever like bum you out that, your work is not like, do you feel like your work is not getting as much visibility or adoption or whatever as it should, given the quality of the work?
Of course, and it used to bother me more. But let me ask you a question. Why do you think that is?
I was hoping to get a fuller answer from you because I don't completely understand what the Ethereum culture is like. If I go on the Ethereum subreddit, of course, it's like filled with a bunch of like these speculators and people who are not really into it. And they just want to read about, oh, is the price going to go up or down, whatever. So there's a whole audience for that hype. And I see a lot of that hypey audience, but I don't have a direct connection with like the community of developers. And I would hope that the community of developers are people for whom actual substantial development is important. So they're actually going to pay attention to what's really being worked on. So I don't know if that is the case. Like, is the community of developers at least like more responsive to the stuff that you're doing? And they see and they understand, oh, there's like real value in this, regardless of what like the rest of the audience thinks. So if the developers are not that interested in your work, then I don't know why, because I feel like those are the people who should be through that wall of hype and be able to see like more deeply, like what is going on, etc.
What I can say is that while I was working for a company in the industry that also had a lot of money, I made some connections even with core developers from the Ethereum Foundation and other people because I was working in a shared office space with multiple crypto companies, and I went to a couple of these parties and conferences, to DevCon, etc. At some point, I had good relationships with other developers, and I even got to present my work on Pipeline, which was one of my first projects. A very interesting thing of a visual diagramming system for batching transactions, connecting transactions. But this did not keep up when I was volunteering. I started getting less and less support, and I think that the two are related. So Ethereum likes to collaborate with people who get grants from the ecosystem, because this is one thing that they can do very, very well. They can give grants, they can pay, that they have, the ecosystem has a lot of money. So once you start to be independent from this perspective, and I also brought some criticism towards how Ethereum is governed, because it's governed more like an oligarchy than an actual decentralized organism, which I thought this is what Ethereum wanted to become, an actual decentralized organism. But it wasn't really like that. So I had some criticism that was not received with an open heart. And what can I say? I don't have much support from the developers in the ecosystem. And if you saw my Twitter account at this point, I think at this point I have some followers, but 1 week ago I only had one, and I kept only one follower. I removed all the followers that I got from this blockchain domain just because I didn't see support for volunteers, and this concept was not really understood.
Yeah.
So just finding, for example, a team like Evmos that was actually received my effort, even though unusual in this space, it received it with an open heart, which was interesting.
Yeah. So, like, does the whole like culture in Ethereum, like, does it make you angry, or are you like, nah, okay, we just got to work with this?
It made me angry.
Yeah.
After this much time, you need to be at peace with other people's decisions.
Yeah.
I didn't create Ethereum. I'm very happy about the fact that it was created and it brought so much attention to decentralized tools. Even this the amount of money that the industry has at least has brought attention to these concepts, and I think that's an important part. But money isn't everything, and it's not going to save any blockchain from being outdated in the future. So we need to see that these tools get developed and are not blocked by just the sense of let's make more money, let's build casinos, let's build games. We need to see these tools being used for example, anti-corruption purposes or proving purposes. This is what I find important.
Yeah. So given that there are all of these different issues that we see today in this like Ethereum or like in general decentralized tech space, one is, the thing that you mentioned, that although the technology that people want to build is like the decentralized, there's actually somewhat a locus of power, and like, it's kind of like an oligarchy. So that's one thing. I would say there's a lot of like unwholesome incentives, like money, for example. A lot of people are in it for money, and they're impatient with the blockchain, with the development work. Oh, when is this gonna happen? Oh my God, why are you taking this long? When is the price gonna go up? Blah blah blah, etc. So there's those like speculator people, and then there's like a lot of bad reporting. So when I read about like articles about what's going on, I'm like, oh my God, who are these people who are reporting? It's like bare minimum work that you've put in. I'm not even in this field. I can read your article. I'm like, oh my God, come on, like work a little bit harder than that. And, so there's bad reporting, and it spreads a lot of misinformation, particularly among people who are kind of in it for the money. They're just going to like hunt around and find whatever. And they're like, they're not that very patient to go into the subtle details of what exactly is going on. It's like, price go up, price go down. So there's like all of these things. And given all of these issues, how do you feel about the future of, let's say, the future of Ethereum and decentralized technology? Do you think it's going to overcome these hurdles and become something that, is like good and like, serves its purpose? Or do you think it's kind of succumbed to these like flaws?
For Ethereum specifically, if Ethereum does not innovate at least at the same pace with the Cosmos ecosystem, for example, which already has interconnection between chains, for example, and some on-chain governance. They will become like Bitcoin is for Ethereum. It doesn't mean that it will disappear. It doesn't mean that people will not still be interested, because with Bitcoin, you cannot develop too much on it. But people, it has a very high price and so on. But I would wish that Ethereum becomes meritocratic. This is my wish, and not oligarchic. So if they would decentralize, for example, their technical processes, the Ethereum improvement proposals, and so on, that would be a very good step.
But isn't the Ethereum improvement proposal process like decentralized? Like anyone can propose it?
Anyone can propose it. It depends if there are enough people to review it. When I tried to have some of these proposals for a generalized typing system, I had a very hard time getting people to merge them into the repository, because they don't allow volunteers to have access to review and be an editor. It's usually people who are paid by the Ethereum Foundation. This is what I'm saying about true decentralization versus a type of oligarchy, which can be well-intentioned, but you don't have a feedback process that's in place.
Yeah.
But in general, I think these decentralized tools are the dawn of a new society, a new society with more responsibility on the individual and a larger capacity to take decisions.
Yeah. I mean, from like a more zoomed out picture, like a big picture, I see already, first, I think the internet was a kind of decentralization of power, A. B, what the internet and websites like Wikipedia and Stack Overflow did was a decentralization of the power of knowledge.
Yes.
And I mean, it's easy for us to underestimate the power of that because, we were born in 1989, but there were like generations before us whose source of knowledge and what's true is basically vetted encyclopedias and things like that, which were written by some like, close group of people. And so they were the authorities. And at some point, the internet arrived and became like cheap and affordable means of interaction. And it was like it returned a lot of the power to the people. Well, I'm kind of talking about the early days of the internet. Now it's become kind of like semi shithole, but because corporations have come in and, but like Wikipedia was actually like, it was like a radical experiment. And now it's easy to understand.
Wikipedia was done by volunteers.
Yeah. So what that did is like, it basically opened up the doorway to knowledge for everyone. And not only did it open up the doorway of knowledge to everyone and it's like free, it also showed that, you can crowdsource information and you can create articles that are about the same quality or better. And it's like more updated, better. And it's not just a mass of garbage. Wikipedia is not a mass of garbage. Like even academics keep going to it all the time. Like, wow, how did that happen? It's just like people sitting at their keyboards and doing this. So I think what information technology and the internet has done has reinstilled a lot of confidence in the ability of, the people. So as I trace the evolution of what technology is doing, this decentralized technology seems like kind of the natural next step. It's like, okay, information has gotten there. How do we do this with like, value exchange? We still depend on like centralized entities for that. How do we change that? So in a way, I kind of feel like, yes, decentralized technology is kind of the natural next technology for us to explore, because it kind of seems like the direction that the human organism is moving towards. This is not out of the blue. If you just look at the previous technologies, that's also what it's doing. That's what we want. That's what people want. And there will be some setbacks or whatever in the middle. but this is definitely the direction in which more people are going to be happier in the future. Would you agree?
And if you look at the early days of the internet, you also had the boom back then. You also had a lot of companies who maybe made a lot of money just because they could say that they are web companies, internet companies, and so on. So it is very similar. And it's actually interesting that from all this Web 2 internet, you say about Wikipedia, which I think helped a lot of people. And Wikipedia is a volunteer effort in essence. It's just the effort of people who, as you said, stood in front of their computer and poured their knowledge and their time and their research into these pages. And I remember very well the time before internet, because I, even though it existed, I had access to internet probably after 14 years of age, maybe 15. So it took a while for
I think same for me.
To have. Okay. Yeah. So I remember the time before it, or the time when internet was very, very slow and you didn't even know what to search.
I think we were born in the same year and we grew up in the same time, also both in like developing countries, in families which did not have a lot of money. So the experience would have been different. For example, for someone in the US, they would have had a lot of early access to this technology. But I remember at some point we had this like dial-up modem that would connect to the internet using your telephone line, and it would go like beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop. And then if someone got a call, it would like get dropped and everything. And I would sit there, wait for like images to load slowly. Yeah, so I kind of remember that. And this is kind of an aside, but I feel very nostalgic for like some of that early part of the internet, because it had not been commodified and commercialized so much. The corporations had not gotten into the internet yet. And I feel like what happens today on the internet is that some big corporations have figured out algorithms to harvest your attention and kind of like addict you in some ways, whatever. So if you look at the internet consumption by people and break it down by what websites, there's going to be a couple of websites or whatever apps that take like maybe 90% of like human attention. And the rest of them are like way lower. Whereas the early days of the internet, it was much more like a gallery. Oh, you just go to people's blogs, things like that. They were not powerful, rich corporations figuring out algorithms, how to get everyone's eyeballs in this thing. So I feel like I used to encounter a lot more easily a lot of different people's things on the internet in the beginning. And it was not constantly riddled with like super shiny stuff. Like, you know, like, well, I remember the time when like, you know, YouTube, at the end of a video, it would just stop. That's it. But now, and eventually what happened was that at the end of a video, they started showing pictures of like other videos. So make it more likely that you'll click on one of them. And then at some point, they're like, okay, no, we're just going to start playing the next video. So it's like all of these different corporations are competing with each other to harvest your attention. And that kind of gallery where people are just curating their own stuff is kind of receded into the background. I don't know why I'm going off on this, but I do feel a little nostalgic for the early days of the internet.
It's true. We need to also acknowledge the other side of things, of how much effort these companies have put in to actually build these products. It's, I think, as hated as, for example, Facebook is, or Twitter, it's incredibly important that we have a place where we can find each other. And we can, a lot of protests have been possible just because these technologies exist. But yes, we need to find ways to put a stop on this ball that has been rolling too much. It's like a snowflake that has become an avalanche. It was very good at some point. It has made all of this good technologies and with good effects on society. But that's why you cannot counter it. You can only counter it with effort.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do this without having the bias of greed. And if this is possible, I would be very happy.
Yeah.
This is what basically I'm trying to do. And I don't know another way than this.
Yeah. So you know that I don't do much marketing for my podcast either. And I think I try to stay from that perspective as well, is that the most important thing for my podcast is not how many people is it going to reach, because I've seen too much of that attention grabbing thing, and I'm like tired of that kind of mindset. So I remember at the beginning when I was starting to put effort into this podcast and do all these recordings, my mind would sometimes try to be like, oh, let's see how many people are following that podcast. But I was like, okay, no, that's like a slippery slope. If I start thinking about that, then it's like my mind slightly changes orientation. And then even when I'm talking to that person, some part of my mind is constantly calculating how optimal is this conversation for the eventual consumption. And I think that just, so at some point I was like, look, Neil, you just got to do it for whatever value you're getting. And if someone else listens to it, that's great. But, let's not pursue that too much. But I feel like it keeps requiring effort. It's not a one-time decision and done. Like a couple of days later, again, I'll feel like, oh my God, why aren't people listening to me? So it feels like a constant effort to keep this greed in check and keep reminding myself, it's like again and again, hey, why am I doing this? Okay, this is why I'm doing this. Okay, let's do it, So I kind of, understand the point of view, but it feels like an ongoing effort to keep reminding myself of my values. So I want to talk a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit more about the Laurel Project. So this is how you described it in your email. A blockchain without currency. The value stored on it will be provable human effort, such as volunteering, like a non-transferable medal of merit. It will be used for governance, proof of effort, provable news, etc. So until I read that last sentence, initially I was not very sure what the scope of the Laurel Project was. I thought it was mostly as a way of compensating like volunteer effort, but I didn't realize that you could also include like governance and provable news. So could you describe a little bit more in like kind of non-technical terms, what is the scope of the Laurel Project? What are the problems that it seeks to solve?
So let's talk about what volunteering means for this project. Because it is equivalent to Karma Yoga. So volunteering is the ultimate freedom that you can have as a human being. It means that you are free to follow your higher ego, which means your principles, your values. You are free to put effort in that part of your ego, which you don't necessarily are able to do when you have a normal job, because your will is subordinate to the will of the company, and a lot of times you don't do things that you find you might do things that you find immoral. So I see volunteering as the ultimate freedom that you can have, working for your higher purpose. And it also allows you to do a lot of effort, because when you do the effort with an open heart, it usually is a lot more effective than if you do something without you wanting to do it because you put all sorts of obstacles in your path. Taking this into consideration, imagine that our current leaders that we have in politics or in other institutions, imagine that you would have their moral background vetted by something like the Laurel Project. Imagine that they would do this volunteering effort into maybe different domains, in maybe the same domain, but doing maybe the lowest paid work. Imagine them having this experience in different areas, even from their domain. Wouldn't you be more have more confidence that they would be more considerate in their actions if they would have this amount of experience? So this is one of the ideas. That's why I think volunteering is a missing piece to the capitalistic society that we have. The communist society had, at least in Romania, had some sort of, they would call it volunteering. They would actually call it patriotic work. It was not volunteering because they would force people to go and even work the land, even do things for society. So it wasn't volunteering. But I think real volunteering is missing as an institution in the current world. And obviously it is very important because we have Wikipedia, we have open source, we have a lot of people who are willing to put in effort and offer it to others, but we don't know exactly who these people are. And maybe it would help us to know, because I would have a lot more confidence in people who I'm sure they did hard effort in their lives for the benefit of others. I would trust them more to be in a position of leadership than somebody who I don't know how they got there.
Yeah.
And about provable news, I mentioned in the video how you can have now provable space and time, with provable time being implemented by taking the blockchain hashes for that current time and embedding them in the video. And at the end of the video, you can make a transaction to a blockchain to seal the start and end of the video, so you know exactly for sure when that video was taken. So a transaction means the currency of that blockchain, that you need to have it, and so on. So volunteering in this case doesn't come with money, so you can have a chain where you earn the currency by doing volunteer effort. It's also a medal, but you can also do these transactions for proving various things. And there are many ideas of what this volunteering institution can become. What is for sure is that it should be decentralized, and it should not be controlled by one entity, but you should have a hierarchy that is very well defined, and people that can that can switch roles in that hierarchy. That would be very interesting, and it has not been done. So be able to switch roles in an organization, so you actually have the experience of every role. So you cannot complain that if you complain that someone else doesn't do a good job, you actually know what that job entails and what they should do. And this goes hand in hand with Karma Yoga, which has this requirement that you need to have multiple roles, you need to have multiple experiences, and because you constantly learn by being put in hard situations.
And by the way, when you were talking about this like patriotic work in communist Romania, I just kind of remembered, I forgot to tell you that I was also actually born in a communist state in India. It was like deeply communist for a long time since India became independent. And it's not real communism because it's a democracy. So there are like different parties that, we have elections, but the Communist Party was the strongest one, and it got re-elected for 37 years. And it's not total communism because it's just a state of India. So it still has to ask the central government for money and things like that. So it's not true communism, but a lot of the ethos was that of communism, where the values that were disapproved were the values of greed and like getting things for yourself and wealth and things like that. The values that were approved were the values of, you know, basically working for the government and doing things like social safety net. Both of my parents worked for the government, by the way. And that was like the main source of employment, is to get into a government job. And if you get into a government job, you cannot be fired. You basically can exist in that job, whether or not you work, until the rest of your life. And so this was like one of the issues of the communism, is that it created a lot of complacency. People could, of course, create workers' unions, and then those workers' unions could have like a strike anytime they want. Like, oh, we're not going to work, you know. So I feel like the work ethic dropped quite a lot. The industriousness of my state started really falling back. There was too much politics all the time, and the politicization of everything, compared to a lot of the rest of India, which, you know, just kept marching on ahead with like doing more stuff. And all of the good talent and the meritorious people started leaving my state to either go somewhere else or leave the country. And so it just became kind of infamous. Like my state became kind of infamous as, oh, you guys just do politics and sit and talk about politics and blah, blah, blah. And you just philosophize about stuff, but nothing really gets done. And the Communist Party also had become so filled with this. It's like, oh yeah, they're going to keep voting us back in power. And at some point in my lifetime, I think I was in high school, they finally fell, like some other party came to power. And then since then, the Communist Party has kind of disappeared from my state. But a lot of the mentality kind of remains the same, because it's just the same people. Like a lot of them are the same people. So I was like, yeah, okay. I kind of forgot to mention that a lot of the ethos that I grew up with was also kind of the same. It's like, you know, what is going to be the impact of your work? Like, are you like doing things, or are you doing things to get money? And if you're doing things to get money, even if you get a lot of money, people don't like you, which is quite different from like what I experienced in the US, where what is the picture that is worship? I mean, Donald Trump became president. I mean, a person like that in India, everyone goes, what the hell is this like arrogant, you know, like he just keeps showing off his wealth. It's not even something that most people would idolize. But here, a lot of people idolize that. Oh, look how much money and power this person has. So I feel like, you know, the ethos are quite different. Okay, big segue. But I wanted to come back to this topic of provable news. So, so yes, you know, the ideas are kind of interesting. One small thing, one small application is that I have noticed that nowadays, sometimes some crucial information, like the results of some very crucial vote or something, the Associated Press will put it on the blockchain or something like that, so that you cannot go back and tamper with what that information was. And that seems to be like a small little example of what you could say, like provable news. You can like trace it back to, you know, so that you can. So something that I've been generally thinking about is that with all of our innovations in technology, it can become harder to pin down what is true. And one of the examples is like these deep fake videos. I'm using that as just one example, but I think with innovations in technology in all directions, I mean, this is what a lot of the machine learning world is doing, how to make stuff that looks real. And you've got like generative adversarial networks and things like that. How can you make something that the human will think is real? And yeah, I kind of linked to that video of like, you know, there was this deep fake of Volodymyr Zelensky apparently saying, oh, the Ukrainians should surrender. And if you're kind of careful, you look at that video, I'm like, that looks kind of fishy. That doesn't look real. But I feel like there's a section of the population, for example, my dad, he keeps falling for like videos on the internet. Well, that's not real. But he does not have that calibration to understand what is real and what is not, especially because he did not grow up like me in the era of the internet, being exposed to a lot of data. He went directly from a generation where there was 5 minutes of evening news, which was pretty much true. And then he came into this world of internet where anyone can put any information up there. And a lot of the time, just because he sees someone talk about it and it's like a white person wearing a lab coat, he's like, oh, this must be true. So I think deepfakes, even today, even if they're not 100% convincing, I'm pretty sure some fraction of the population really thought that was Zelensky. And as this technology gets better and better, what I'm worried about is at some point it might become like really hard to tell like what's real and what's not. Like it kind of seems like an evolutionary arms race. On the one hand, it's technology that is trying to get better at detecting what's real. And on the other hand, it's technology that's trying to get better at fooling you. So how do you feel about that?
I think that is very good, because it will force us to actually think about how to prove things more exactly. So we have an idea about how you could solve with deepfakes, but I'm going to only tell you this. You need to think about the problem is, how can you prove that something has happened in a certain space and a certain time, making sure that the time was continuous? And there are ways to prove it, but it will require a bit more effort and attention from our part, especially from figures that are public and like the president of Ukraine. But I think these obstacles and problems will push us to find better technical solutions for the next generation, and it will force us to become smarter. It's, as you said, it is an evolutionary thing, and we are, as a society, we are growing, we are evolving, we're becoming smarter, we have better tools than we've ever had. And it's just a part of the journey, like hackers doing all this, forcing developers who handle security issues to become even smarter, to have even better solutions. So this, of course, it's a game of evolution in the end. And as much as I could compare this the deep fakes with what happens now in the news, because you don't get you only get opinions and descriptions of what happened. So this will force the media to actually find ways to give us the actual proof with the actual data of what happened, instead of just telling us about it in their own words. And I think this is a very good thing. When going back to the childhood thing, if you get true data, factual data, you can have a much better opinion than if you get pre-digested information and conclusions. And I hope this will be the result of having all these deep fakes. The result should be that we are actually going to get the truth.
Well, I mean, it's very refreshing to see that you kind of like have an optimistic viewpoint on this. But I'll confess how I feel about this sometimes. It's like, when like some technology is getting better, and the technology to counter it is getting better, and the technology blah blah, it's just like this. I kind of feel like we are having to run faster and faster to stay in the same place. Like, we are on a treadmill, and the treadmill is getting faster and faster, and we have to keep running faster and faster just to stay in the same place. And it feels kind of like tiring sometimes to me. It's like, can everyone, all of the technology just stop? Everyone just stop doing what you're doing, and let's just go and hang out in a beach for a couple of years. So, I mean, I do kind of feel like a lot of the time, I think like humans are doing too much. Maybe everyone could just like stop and chill for some time. Do you ever like feel like that?
We cannot stop. But I think we have a duty for, just because we've been given this time on this earth. However, for better or worse, we have an experience, and I think any experience is better than no experience. So in a way, we have a duty to at least leave this society better off than when we came into it.
Yeah.
So if all this effort and activity and the effects of this will be a better society for the future, and I think it will. I think the world is getting more moral, not less moral. I think the word, at least physical violence, is lower now than it has been in the past, and I think it will get better. We are already talking a lot about emotional violence, about things that before we didn't even talk about.
Yeah.
So I think the world is getting better. Maybe we're not that great now at it, or we're not, but I think it's if you use technology for trying to build tools for truth and collaboration, I think we will get a better world than we had.
Yeah. I just remembered in your email response to me, you said that you wanted to make an announcement. Was it about the Laurel Project or about Provable News or something? Is this something that we have not gone over already? Then,
yes, it is about the Laurel Project. So what the Laurel Project wants to do is prove effort. And for example, for proving effort, because the first effort that needs to be proven is the actual development of the Laurel Project. So the first tool used for proving effort is GitHub, which is a public site where the code lives and you can see exactly who developed what. And for me, actually, GitHub was extremely important. I don't have a background in computer science. So what helped someone like me was my effort and being able to demonstrate that effort. And GitHub was a very big part. So these tools for proving effort are very important in our next society and in the society of today. And that's why software development, I changed my career to be in this space where it seemed that there were better principles, there was more openness and more meritocracy. And this is the way forward for us all. And then what we will have is email integration. So this hasn't been done in the blockchain space. And we want to have email integration for the Laurel Project because you need to prove, for example, that you've sent an email to an institution. So this is part of the political discussion where you want to prove if you have, I'll take my country's example. We have a lot of corruption and even institutional corruption. You may have a problem and send an email to the police department and you may never hear from them again. So these things can happen. And we want a tool that can demonstrate publicly that you have sent some email to an institution and they should be giving you a response, because if you only base yourself on the institutions, they can be corrupt and you will not find the truth. And all of this is based on effort, with the idea that if you put in the work, you already demonstrate goodwill. And no person who wants to be a scammer, which by definition is a person who wants to get rich without doing the work, will do the work. So it's we're starting with this baseline of proving effort.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really kind of impressed and I appreciate the rate at which, it seems like you keep coming up with like new ideas. It's like, wow. It seems like last week you were thinking of some idea and you're like developing some prototype. And this week you're thinking of some like other idea and it's like they keep coming.
So imagine when we'll have volunteers, we know exactly what type of work to give them, and if 10 people would come, it would be something incredible.
So I'm going to ask you the last question for this technology section of the podcast. It's kind of a pretty speculative, hypothetical question. Do you have any broad ideas or imaginations or visions for what you think the future of human society is going to look like? Let's say in our lifetime, future of human society and technology. Any ideas on any aspect of that you've been thinking about?
I think morality and ethics will be a big part of society. We've been toying around with, for example, even changing our diets to not kill animals. We have all sorts of people being whistleblowers, some real whistleblowers, some maybe not so real, but I see the Laurel Project as also as an organization of auditors, of moral auditors, of other companies, of the state institutions, and I think this is something that is needed. You need people that can be unbiased, that do not depend with their livelihood on that company or on some institution. You need an international organization, so you do not depend of a government in one nation, and we need an institution of whistleblowers. That's something that volunteers can also be. They need to provide value where they are. So if they volunteer for an institution, they need to provide value, provable value, because otherwise this doesn't work. You need to prove goodwill. You need to prove that you are unbiased, and that you actually want the best for society. You work for the benefit of society. So I see the Laurel Project as part of this future society. Otherwise, I wouldn't put this much effort in it. And it goes hand in hand with technology that where you put more effort into thinking about what effects that technology will have on society. And this goes into another discussion about Karma Yoga and Raja Yoga. Because you, as a developer, if you build tools for other people, you need to think a bit about the effects of what you're building. You do make choices, design choices in your software to make it go one way or another. So I think this will become very important, even though maybe it doesn't seem like it. But it is the perfect counterpart to capitalism, which has a lot of good parts. As you also said, if you have a society based on pure communism where you don't change that much, you don't do much. So capitalism is very good at being very, very able to create value for others, because that's where the money comes from. But you need a counterpart.
Cool, thank you. So let's now talk about spirituality and psychedelics. I'm actually quite excited that you sent me some topics of that. I did not expect that. I thought that, you were either not going to send me anything and I was just going to ask you my questions, or you're going to send me something about something else. And so I'm kind of excited that you're going to be talking about some stuff that I find exciting. So could you tell me a little bit about what your spiritual trajectory has been? Did you have any like spiritual experiences in your life? And how is it that, you're from Romania, but you kind of got into what are like Eastern and Indian spirituality? So how did this whole trajectory happen in your life?
I can say that my spiritual journey in a way started in childhood when I had a lot of time on my hands just to think about things. And you eventually ask yourself the question of what even am I? And what's this existence that
Yeah.
I'm having?
Yeah, I've done that
How
too many
can
times. Yeah.
how can you even determine anything? But of course, with the brain of a child, when you don't have enough tools or analytical knowledge, it's quite hard. You don't even know where to start. Uh, I remember the first time when I asked my father how does basically how does sound work, because we had this uh, big box in the house that made sound. How does it do it?
Yeah.
And I could not comprehend how things can exist that I cannot see. I had a hard time comprehending that there are you actually have microscopes or have different ways to measure. It was a whole world of the unknown. How can you know what you cannot see? Um, so the first incursion in these types of questions were with a very naive way of looking at the world and trying to determine is there a god. Is actually the first time that I really wanted to know if there's a god was in second grade. We did uh, Romania is the Orthodox Christian country. So we had religion as a subject in school, but it was not really religion as much as indoctrination in this system of thinking. But that's when in second grade, around 8 years of age, I really wanted, and I was desperate to find out, is there a God? My parents didn't believe in God. Usually in the communist regime, it was
Yes,
against.
same for
Yeah.
us also. Yeah.
Yes. So it was a clash, a first clash of two worlds of my parents and this new concept that something exists that's beyond my parents. So for that specific reason, it was a good thing, because again, it forces you to get out of the box that you are in and ask yourself, is there something bigger? And then I had the chance to meet a friend who was more into this type of Eastern practices and in Hatha Yoga, and we had some courses on this in my country, and it was very good. At least I didn't do as much Hatha Yoga. I don't do as much Hatha Yoga as I would want and need, but I still practice, and it has helped me a lot with focus. I usually do Hatha Yoga that where you stay multiple minutes in the same asana. Not much the dynamic asanas, but the static ones. And this forces you to have to be comfortable with yourself in the moment and quiet your mind. And this is very useful when programming, because you need to stay a lot of time on the same, focused on the same thing. And when my mind is very fuzzy, if I do a meditation or an asana, I can get more into the zone, because it helps my mind quiet down and focus on the important problems. So this is part of the spiritual practice that I do, and also fasting, different ways of fasting is a and was and is a big part of my practice. And I found out that it improves my mind a lot. immediately when I don't eat in a clean way, or between the hours that I set for myself, I don't have such a clear mind. It's even my emotions are harder to control. So it's an ongoing effort in a way that I do every day. But I had the chance to experience some interesting substances, and I should say that it was in a space and time where they were legal. So I don't condone the use of these substances without proper care about even about legality.
Yeah, could you tell me a little bit more about your experiences on the psychedelics? I'm very curious. Also, it's because it seems like the psychedelics that you mentioned, I don't know if Ibogaine qualifies as a psychedelic, but the substances that you mentioned, Ibogaine and Muscimol, I guess.
Yeah.
They are not some of the more commonly used psychedelics that I hear about. So I've heard like plenty of people's experiences on like LSD or mushrooms, and some people's experiences on DMT. But Ibogaine and Muscimol, I haven't heard. Yes, actually, yesterday when I was working on this list of questions, I was like, what are these things? And I started looking them up on Wikipedia. I'm like, oh, I have never even looked at the Wikipedia page for what these things are. So I'm kind of curious to know what these experiences have been for you.
Yes. So I would compare these experiences with how artificial intelligence algorithms work. I've said that you need to find, so you need to not be to find your way out of a local minima. A minima is given by, for example, a reward function. It's when a reward function has a maximum value, or you think it's a maximum value. So you get comfortable in some instantiation of your personality or thoughts or principles. And these substances are a way to jolt you a little bit from that perspective, so you can maybe find a better one that you haven't seen up until that point. It's getting you out of that box that you've fit yourself into, and giving you enough space so you can maybe find different ideas and understand the world from a different perspective. So what they do is they jiggle a bit the parameters of your brain, so you can find maybe a better minima. And Ibogaine, for example, does this, works on your ego. It forces, if you want to have an experience with it, you need to let go of your ego and just receive whatever it is that you are seeing with your mind's eyes, and not put your ego in it. And I will go into a bit more detail about how this is done. And the other one with Amanita, Amanita works on time. It distorts time. It gives you another perspective on time and on cycles. So that's where it's quite interesting. But I want to preface this with something. I think it's very important, if you want to have these experiences, it's very important what you do before. You can have these experiences to have fun, which I don't. That can backfire a lot on yourself, on your moral backbone, and it's not something that I that I would advise people to have these experiences just for fun, just because of peer pressure or because of wanting to fit in. Even if you do that, you need to be mindful, because you can learn a lot of things about yourself and about others, and you need to have a strong moral backbone to not use this new information in ways that's not moral. So I would advise people to have a bit of an ascetic how I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I'm talking about what monks, for example, do. They
like ascetic.
yes, that's
ascetic.
what I'm saying. Okay. I wasn't sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. So I think taking care of your diet is very important. For example, I didn't eat for 24 hours when I took these substances. Also, it's very important to know and respect Yama and Niyama, the virtues that you need to respect for in your relationship with others and then with yourself. So I would talk a bit about this just to remind them to people, which is non-violence, ahimsa, the 5 most important yamas: ahimsa, non-violence; satya, following of the truth; asteya, not stealing; brahmacharya, which is chastity and in general abstinence; and aparigraha, non-possessiveness, not wanting too much of something. I think these are very important because it lets you, when you have the experience, they let you focus on your higher ego, on the higher part of your ego, instead of your lower needs and wants and that you usually experience each day. And then niyama, which are less, so you can prove yamas more. Niyamas you cannot really prove because it's work within your own self. Saucha, the purity, cleanliness of mind, which is of speech and body, which is very hard to attain, especially in today's world where you have so many distractions. It's hard to keep a clean mind without thinking of all other problems. Santosha, which is content, acceptance of others, accepting your life as it is, which may be hard. Then tapas, which is austerity and discipline. Svadhyaya, which is the study of self. It's self-awareness, knowing why you do what you do. Ishvara pranidhana, which is attention to God and the energies of God, and to give a definition of God. God in the end is what you think God is. For you, God is the highest, the combination of the morals that you think would be the highest. It's this perfect being that maybe you could actually be yourself if you would follow your own God. So this is what is a very applicable and usable concept of God. And I think we have a duty to know what is God for us, who is God, what principles does this God follow, and because it tells a lot about us and what we want to become and we want to do, and it becomes very, very useful in our journey. So because these substances have a a very strong spiritual connotation, the idea is that you should get rid of everything that bogs you down in your usual day-to-day life. So you need to prepare a bit for the experience, so you actually have something that's not ordinary, and it takes you to know more about yourself. And also it's very good to train your mind to do meditation, because things like Amanita, you will sleep and you will not remember anything if you don't have a strong mind. Or you may not be able to recall and understand the experience. So this is a very good thing to train your mind in these ways. And to explain a bit about, I'll start with Iboga, which was, I think fondly of that experience. It was, if you think about how Eastern philosophy has the chakras, you have Muladhara chakra, Svadhisthana, Manipura, which is the will, the ego, and then you have the upper part with Anahata, which is the heart. Iboga was on Anahata. It was an opening of the heart with a renunciation of the ego, of your own will, and just an example of love, of selfless love, of unconditional love, but in a way that rewards you for wanting to evolve, not a static love that's born from what can I say? It's from need.
Yeah, like a kind of attachment.
Yes, it was without attachment, but with rewarding you for wanting to evolve. Iboga was a series of tests of this sort. So it started with seeing horizontal lines of color that were very dynamic, and I was afraid that I could not have the experience because I was afraid I could not have visual experiences. So what I did was I was concentrating with my eyes closed on those lines that were there, and trying to just to focus on them. And eventually they started forming various shapes and forms, but also they always had that kind of a dynamism to them. And then when I was opening my eyes, I could still see them in my normal view. And with an increasing sense of dizziness, I also have a history of motion sickness, so that was quite hard for me. So what I did to control the sensation of being dizzy and to not vomit what I had just eaten, I had to lay down on the ground with my back to the floor and my face up in the open. And what was very, very important, I was staying still all the time. I had to relax my body, because otherwise it would the dizziness would be so bad that I would need to go and vomit, and I didn't want to do that. So it was very important that my hands were at this angle. They were spread up, and it's another sign of being ready to take in anything that is going to come for you. And one other thing that I did was just press the root of my nose with kind of three fingers, and this helped a lot with that sensation. But generally staying very relaxed and just letting anything happen. And what I started to slowly see was, I saw myself as a child, and I was no longer a child at that point in time, but I saw myself as a child in front of me. So I was also there as an observer, but also a child, and I was following this child on a path. And I remember seeing a kind of a carousel, and then with different faces from my life. And then I started thinking, okay, these are distractions. These are faces from my past. I shouldn't uh, be paying attention to them. Let's see what other things happen. And at some point, um, some sort of, when you hear about Iboga, you actually hear about people seeing African people in their dreams, and that's what also happened to me. Which is, I didn't expect that necessarily. This is how my brain processed all that experience. So I had a guide that was like an African features, like you would see tribal people, because your mind works with what you know. So of course your mind tries to see with what you already know. You piece together information. So it was with someone with African features, but with a light coming from within that was overwhelming everything else. So that was kind of a guide, and at some point he took me, the one who was in that setting stage, and I was going through some tunnels, and going through tunnels, and then I ended up in a place that had kind of there are some wooden logs that are used for martial arts. You put them in the ground and then you step on them, and you do all sorts of. So there was a land full of these wooden logs, and then I saw an entire tribe of the same type of people, seemed like African people, but with a very powerful light coming from within, and they were running, and they were running so fast that they were like ghosts. And in a way, I knew they were running fast, but I could at the same time see them. And they passed me, they smiled at me, but they passed me, and I was left behind. And what do I do now? I want to be with these people. It was such a nice feeling of openness that I also want to go, but I'm stuck here. How can I run? And then I started asking myself, really, I cannot run. Why wouldn't I be able to run? Let me try to run. And it was very hard. It's hard to explain because you're still in your mind. So in my mind, it was hard to run, and I had to put in the effort to try to run. And after I did that, I actually started to run, and I was running with them. And that was one of the greatest moments in the whole experience. It was such a great joy, and to be able to be in that communion with it was a pure joy. That's the only thing how I can describe what Iboga offered me. But then after that, I ended up in a place where people were around a very big rock statue, and they were doing offerings and so on. And I was looking at that scene, and I started seeing that statue come over me. And this is a pattern that has repeated itself. It's a test of fear. I was scared that statue is going to follow me, and it was coming towards me. And I tried to calm myself, saying, look, this is not real. This is a dream. Just take it in. Just see what happens. Stay in the same position, relaxed, and see what happens. And it went through me. And then my guide appeared again, and he took me to another place. And I had another such test with all sorts of figures that were scary, that were coming towards me, and I tried to relax myself and take it all in because nothing's going to hurt me and so on. And again, Then the guide appeared and he took me to another place. And at one of the last tests was again something like this, and I saw something that I could only describe as it resembled, if you know Anubis from Egyptians. It was like the head of a dog in profile, and somehow I got so scared because it didn't seem like an empty figure. It seemed like some entity was behind that representation. I got scared.
I think Anubis is supposed to be like the god of like the dead or something in in Egyptian culture. Yes. Like something kind of creepy.
Yes. So that's where I stopped, and that's where the vision stopped.
Oh.
So all of these were tests of trying to open up your ego, to not be afraid, to be open to anything, to accept anything. And the moment I couldn't take it, that's when it stopped.
Do you feel like if you take Iboga at some point in the future, it might resume from whatever position you stopped?
I don't know, but if I have the opportunity at some point, I would be curious to see how I evolved from that.
Yeah.
But it taught me a lot of things, and the experience of that pure joy of doing the right thing, because when you were finishing a test correctly, you would go to another level. So this is how it felt like a continuous test, and that was a great joy for me.
Yeah.
But it also showed me that I have some issues that I need to solve within myself.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I also feel like I have this like recurring issue that keeps coming up either on psychedelic trips or like I kind of mentioned in my email, in my like lucid dreams, is the recurring thing of what am I most afraid of? And it can take like multiple different forms. One is I'm afraid of losing my mind because it's very important to me. Like I'm a PhD student. Like I really identify a lot with my mental capabilities. One time on a heroic dose of shrooms, I really lost my mind. I was like, I couldn't do basic stuff, like remember who I am, what is a PhD, where do I live? You know, I found myself 2 floors below where I am, completely naked, locked out of my room, and I couldn't answer basic questions. And at some point I was like, wow, I've really actually, the worst thing possible has happened. Like I've lost my mind. I thought it is something that will happen when I get old enough and my mental capacities will start to fail, and that's when I will be confronted with that scary thing, but it has happened now. But I noticed that I wasn't as scared as I thought I would. Like my conceptual mind was still scared a little bit because it couldn't find the rest of it, but I did not find so much fear coming up from my body. Like my body was still like, just go to sleep, it's gonna be fine. So, and the next morning I woke up and my mind was back. But I think I learned something from it, which is a rehearsal or a demo of facing this thing that I'm like very scared of. So that's one part of it, is losing my mind. But what is also related is the fear of death. Like I grew up with a very strong fear of death. And in some of my psychedelic experiences and my lucid dreaming experiences, I noticed that what I end up doing, like in the lucid dreams, is basically try to kill myself. Like basically try to go through the thing that is the scariest. And like how you were saying, you know, the statue was falling on me, on you, but it went through you. I have had like a similar experience where I would do the scariest thing, which is jump off of the edge of a building. And then instead of like hitting the ground, I would keep falling through like different floors. And of course, it's a dream, so I'm not actually endangering myself. But I feel like that experience still teaches me something. Like I feel like after that experience, I am actually a little bit less afraid of this thing that I call death. And so, yeah, I feel like I can relate a little bit, at least, to the kinds of challenges that you're facing, because I feel like, you know, that fear is like like a recurring element. Like, oh, Neil, what are you most afraid of? And it keeps coming back. And yeah, so that's kind of interesting. And okay, so let's talk about so you talked about the Iboga, and let's talk about the mushroom.
So the interesting thing is that Amanita also can have this effect of making you not know how to do basic things. So you can experience this when you're still under the influence at the end, and you need to relearn how to walk. You need to relearn how to pee. That's and you do that by actually remembering conceptually what needs to be done and trying to make your body react as you would expect it by what you know. So yeah, you definitely need to be prepared to have this type of experience too, and be prepared to again be very relaxed, have a warm environment where you can feel okay. And what it does, it detaches you completely from the body. You're not aware of any environment or setting you are in. You are completely detached from the time and space. And it's even more important to have these exercises of meditation, and especially something like Shambhavi Mudra, which is focusing on an object and trying to reimagine that object inside your mind with all the details that it has. Because if you you can sleep it off, you can just go to sleep and not remember anything that has happened. What happened to me was again kind of a series of tests, which I don't think I passed, because they were repeating all over again, and it was very draining psychologically and mentally in that test. It seemed like I started to think about evolution and how did we go to being nothing to being humans. So I was trying to experience the life of a cell, then a fish, then something else, and it was with retaining all the past memories. So that the concept of reincarnation, for example, which also Hinduism has, and also Jewish religion has, you at least you don't keep the memory of past lives. And I can understand that with that experience, it was extremely tiring to know that you have to restart everything all over again from scratch. That was the whole torment of my experience. So I was trying to live all these lives, and then another one would appear, and another one, and then I was living the life of a human. And at some point from that experience, I was a creator of worlds, because I had the experience of living all these lives. The second test was being, it was like there were multiple entities, but I was each one of them. So I was doing this effort of creating planets for each of these entities. And again, I was starting something, doing from scratch, creating these planets, and then restarting the process all over again. And it doesn't really
kind of feels like what you do in real life also.
Yes, it does. I noticed the resemblance. At least at that point in time, I got a lesson on effort, which is a very good lesson to have, even when it seems like a Sisyphean task of starting the same thing all over again. that was the main experience. At the end of the experience, I had some realization that I cannot really explain right now because it doesn't make sense in this in the real world context. Back then, it made sense, but it's not that important. The important part was this concept of time and time cycles that can repeat, and it was interesting. And when I remember waking up because I needed to go to the bathroom, but I couldn't know. First, I was afraid that I couldn't find my way back into the real world because there were all these tunnels and I didn't know which one to take. And at some point, I was drawn from the space that I was in back into the real world, but I couldn't speak. I couldn't say exactly what I needed. I didn't know what I needed. It was really, really strange to have this compulsion in you, but you don't know what it is, and you cannot explain it. So it took some time to relearn how to walk and make all these normal activities. That's what I can say about this experience.
Yeah. So you said that these experiences of like Ibogaine and the mushroom and Raja Yoga have inspired or influenced you to become a Karma Yogi. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like how did that happen? You did mention a little bit in your experiences.
Yes, my most of the decisions that I took in life, especially after around 24 years of age, were related to this spiritual path in the end that I want to create for myself. For my life, I'm more interested in what I can leave to this society as part of myself. And one of the things that I was let's say touched in my life was trying to make things right when I see injustice. And you cannot tackle injustice case by case. It takes a lot of time to try to help one person or another. So what I want to build is tools that would help more people. That's why I eventually got into software, and I was and my work eventually got me here in decentralized technologies and in this work of volunteering. It's not the first time. It's the first time I'm a true volunteer, but I've been volunteering, for example, for 2 years in the medical emergency department, the biggest medical emergency department in my country, in the capital, in Bucharest, as a medical student, which was an experience where you learn a lot. You see a lot of suffering, you see a lot of people. It's the emergency room, so it's I'm glad I had that experience of helping people who needed help back then, like the doctors, the nurses, because we would do anything that they would need of us, in of course within the limits of our knowledge. And I've been a volunteer for a long time, with even building medical imaging tools for students when I was still in university, and translating vocabularies and so on. So I'm trying to bring this into the blockchain domain, also, which is in need of good karma.
So let me quote what you said. I found it kind of interesting. You said, the age of Karma Yoga is dawning. the moral landscape will be deeply transformed by the ability to prove the quality and quantity of effort. Those that demonstrate such virtues on the blockchain, which is an immutable medium, will rightfully earn the trust of others. I work around 15 hours every day, including weekends, to implement such a blockchain. I invite all karma yogis or volunteers to validate. It is almost implemented. So, several very interesting ideas here. Let's unpack that from the beginning. Could you elaborate a little bit on this idea of your vision of like, why do you feel that the age of karma yoga is done?
Because up until this time in our society, you could not prove effort. Now we actually have tools to prove effort and to prove volunteering work. And I gave an example like GitHub, which is a very known platform for software developers, very used for open source, where this is, you can prove your effort. You can prove that you've worked exactly what you say. And there will be a new generation of tools along these lines, and they will be used to compute character. This is also what the Laurel Project wants to do, to be able to say these people have done this effort, that they can prove they have a good character. And I think this is very important for the leaders of our society.
Yeah. So one idea that I guess it has been kind of bubbling in the back of my mind, but I have not been able to put words to it, is that up until these technologies of like trustless verification and trustless proving and things like that, humans are social creatures. So we have like our own kind of organic ways of judging and evaluating people, how much we can trust them, how much we think they're actually like honest workers, etc. Of course, a lot of the time, those perceptions can be manipulated, like by politicians and whatever. So it's not perfect, but at the end of the day, like a lot of people do use this kind of, like when we see a person, there's of course the stuff that they're saying to me, but there's all kinds of like vibes that I'm getting from them. And whether we like it or not, we form a kind of an image of that person based on these like nonverbal, subconscious, like energetics of like, what is this person like, whatever, and what are they saying? And so there's this thing that is like hard to pin down called like trust that I think emerges in human societies. From what I would say, a lot of it emerges not from conceptual or analytical proving things or pinning things down, but just like, I get a feeling about this person. And a lot of the time, people will say that that is what they trust a lot more rather than any intellectual or conceptual like proving or something, because a lot of people would say, oh, you can fake all of those things, but what you can't fake is this like kind of like subconscious feeling that I'm getting out of. It's just a feeling. So would you say that, that even as these technologies of like trustlessly proving or trustlessly verifying your worth or merit or your contributions keeps developing, that these like kind of organic ways, like non-technological, non-conceptual ways, trust-based ways are going to disappear, or they should disappear?
So let's analyze a bit what is this feeling that we usually feel when we talk with other people. Because if it's not analytical, if you don't look at that person's actions and effects on society and on other people, what we usually respond to is the types of feelings and emotions that we have experienced with other people in our lives. So we do some sort of pattern matching of what I feel with this person. It's automatic, it's very fast, it's a reflex, that an emotional reflex that we have. And that's not necessarily correct. If we don't do a combination of this and the analytical skills of actually trying to process, realistically speaking, is what has this person done as actions in society? How has this person's actions affected the world around him or her? Because otherwise it's easy to feel good with a person that has the characteristics of maybe one of your parents or one of your friends, childhood friends, and so on. And this plays a lot in our interactions. It's hard to figure out if a person is honest just by looking at that person, because we lie to ourselves. So of course it's not necessarily that we want to, but it can be a defense mechanism. So if we are to live in a world that is open to everybody, regardless of experience, religion, culture, and so on, we need to find some common ground. And the common ground might not be in these types of tight-knit relationships that we have in our own circle. We might need to put ourselves in a situation where it's not that comfortable for these reflexes that we have made. So we need to look at tools that are generalizable in some way, and tools that can help us prove facts instead of how we necessarily feel about them, because it can happen that we're wrong. So we need this balance between tools for a generalizable truth. And we will evolve our emotions and our feelings to match this. I think this will happen.
I think I agree that a lot of technologies, when they are first presented, they kind of exist on the level of, oh, there's this like novel thing. But as human beings interact more and more with it, I think what happens is it becomes an extension of our neural, like perception of the world. And so it just becomes integrated into how we perceive someone or whatever. Like, yeah, of course, I think snap judgments still happen, but a lot of the time it happens as a result of the thing that I see now. Like, I can go on a website and within microseconds, I have a gut feeling of how trustable I think this website is. But it's not based on anything random. It is kind of based on cues that I'm seeing there that I'm like absorbing really quickly. What are the fonts? What is the design like, and things like that. And some of it you could say is like, it's not very rational, but it is also, maybe it is rational because it's like the human mind is kind of like a Bayesian statistical learning thing. It keeps on making hypotheses based on the statistics that it sees, and it keeps seeing the results of those hypotheses, was that correct or not? And hopefully it keeps learning in the right direction. It's like these statistics map onto these possible consequences. And people say you should not stereotype. But a lot of the purpose of the brain is to summarize. Otherwise, we would not be able to exist in the world if we couldn't summarize people. So I feel like, you're kind of right that, that in the beginning, when we were like, probably like hunter-gatherer tribes, our minds were not in this like whole technological world of like a tsunami of information. So the amounts, the kinds of information that we were basing our gut reactions on was just like this organic stuff. But as we kept increasing the sphere of the accessible knowledge, I think we can still have like a kind of like organic perception, or what we're calling like feeling, but that feeling might be based on an extension of the amount of previously available information.
Of course, and if you make that pool of information bigger, you will have better biases that are more useful than.
Yeah. So you're right. I noticed that the last question that I had for you has kind of already been answered, because it's like, the attitude of Karma Yoga in the blockchain development, and we already kind of talked about how it connects with the Laurel Project. So I think I'm kind of satisfied with that question now, unless you wanted to say something else about that.
Just that the Laurel Project is the generalization of my own spiritual path.
Yeah.
So I generalized it so that anyone else can do it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That was all my questions. And thanks a lot for coming on my podcast. I did not really expect that I would be talking to you so soon. So yeah,
thanks for inviting me, and thanks for making this effort.
Yeah.
I came as a result of your volunteer work.